It's no secret that game developers love to take inspiration from movies, cartoons, TV and so on. In fact, it'd be pretty hard to think what games would look like if they didn't, honestly. Perhaps we'd all still be playing variations of Pong. But, by and large, their inspirations never really cause any issues. However, some celebrities out there have thought differently, and they've tried to sue game companies, claiming that they've ripped off their likenesses and infringed upon their rights. It has to be said that usually this hasn't gone down too well for them, either in the courtroom or in the eyes of the public. So, this episode, we take a look at these litigious leading lights, these belligerent big names, and these disputatious Dions. As I say. But, hello you. I'm Guru Larry, and I welcome you to Fact Hunt. 5 celebrities who sued for their likenesses. Space Channel 5. It's a funny old game, isn't it? It takes quite the mind to conjure up a game where you play as a go-go dancing reporter fighting off an alien threat with the power of rhythm. But people seem to enjoy it. It's also very colourful and psychedelic and carefree. Enough for it to be a success for the Dreamcast. Enough for a certain King of Pop and big Sega fan to request that he be included into the game after he saw it in development. There was, however, another less famous pop star who wasn't quite so happy about what she thought was her inclusion into the game. So unhappy, in fact, that she filed a lawsuit in Sega's general direction. The star in question was Kieran Magenta Kirby, better known as Lady Miss Kia, the lead singer of Delights. You know, the band that did Groove Is in the Heart. Miss Kia sued Sega in 2003, claiming that Sega's Space Channel 5's main character, Ooh La La, was a complete rip-off of her style, and the character's name was even based on her singing Ooh La La La. Yes, really. The funny thing was, Kia had actually been contacted by an ad agency in 2000 on behalf of Sega, who hoped to enlist her to promote the UK release of the game. She declined, but weirdly, it then took her 3 years to take Sega to court. The length of time that it took for Miss Kia to launch a suit was one of Sega's arguments against her, as well as stressing that Space Channel 5 was a Japanese game and none of the folks behind it had the slightest blooming clue who she even was. The character was more influenced by anime and had actually originally intended to be male. Eventually, the court sided with Sega, saying that while there were similarities between Ooh La La and Miss Kia, more than enough transformation had occurred to make the reporter a separate creation. That and Kia had to pay Sega's legal costs too. It was ultimately a big win for Sega, and the case itself actually had an impact on the decisions in some of the other ones we're going to be featuring in this video. Weirdly, the story doesn't end there. In 2006, long after this had all wrapped up, the Wii version of Samba de Amigo ended up featuring D-Light's most famous song, and on a stage that featured Ooh La La. Perhaps things are being patched up between the two sides, or Sega's just rubbing salt into the wound. But then again, Miss Kia's also got into slap fights on Twitter with Sega fans over this case. So, probably not. One-hit wonder pop acts can, it turns out, be more than a little sensitive. Aside from selling millions upon millions of copies, generating tons of hand-wringing controversy, and probably being worth more than most of the world's countries, Rockstar's Grand Theft Auto usually sends up a lot of things. There's all sorts of parodies, funny adverts, and characters clearly based on real-life folks. Most of the time, no one really seems to mind about any of it. It's all part and parcel of being a celebrity, isn't it? Well, until Lindsay Lohan came along anyway. The one-time Mean Girls actress strenuously objected to the character of Lacey Jones, a blonde girl who features in Grand Theft Auto 5. This one, to be precise. She's all over the box art and loading screens. the tabloid newspaper star was most displeased and took both Rockstar and Take-Two Interactive to court. Specifically, Lindsay Lohan and her lawyers claimed that the main image of Lacey Jones was based on a picture that was taken of her in 2007, where she's also holding up 2 fingers and a mobile phone. This evidence was enough for the case not to be thrown out immediately, and even enough for some to reckon that Lohan might win. Some were less convinced, however. Ned Luke, who voices Michael in GTA 5, tweeted out a picture of Lindsay Lohan and a pig, positing there might just be a resemblance between the two. It took a few years and a couple of appeals, but in the end, Rockstar were victorious. The judge ruled, again, that while the character of Lacey Jonas could be considered a portrait of her specifically, it was more a satirical representation of the style of a modern beach-going young woman, and they ruled in Rockstar's favour. Lohan tried to appeal, but to no avail. Her claims were wasted. In the words of Sigmund Freud, sometimes a skimpily dressed blonde girl is just a skimpily dressed blonde girl. Lindsay Lohan wasn't the only one to try and take Rockstar on in this manner. Karen Gravano, star of reality TV show Mob Wives and wife of real-life mafia underboss Sammy the Bull Gravano, sued the makers of GTA 5 for $40 million, claiming that the character of Antonia Bettino was based on her. And much like Lohan, she failed. Even if there was similarities, Rockstar were protected due to their game being a work of fiction and satire. So, probably a better defence than Rockstar's initial claim that Gravano was too fat to resemble Bettino, in all honesty. Sometimes these courtroom squabbles can take quite a long time to sort out, if they even get sorted out at all. In the world of copyright and likeness disputes, the cases we've seen so far are nothing. How about the legal scrap between Nintendo and everyone's favourite spoon-bending motherfucker Uri Geller, which lasted 20 bloody years? And it was all over a Pokemon called Kadabra who just happened to have a spoon in his hand. It all sounds very silly indeed. And well, that's because it is. Right up to the finish. Even before Uri Geller got involved, Kadabra was no stranger to controversy. Due to him being presented as a magician, he was a main target for Christian fundamentalists who claimed that Pokemon was a work of the devil. One pastor claimed that the symbol on his head is a pentagram, which it isn't, and that he also had a Nazi symbol on his chest, which he didn't. According to them, Kadabra was a purely evil symbol of the occult, designed to lure people over to the dark side. Funnily enough, Uri Geller would use some of these arguments in his lawsuit, which he launched in 2000 after some Japanese kids have asked him to sign Kadabra's Pokemon cards. He also said that the Japanese name of the character, Young Giri, was similar to his own, and that the occult nature of the Pokemon was an attack on his image. It all sounds like a similar story to the last couple of cases, and indeed a California court dismissed Geller's claims in 2003. However, this wasn't enough. Geller launched several other cases around the world against the character, and in the end, Nintendo just stopped bothering with it, saying that Kadabra would not be appearing again until both sides had reached an agreement, which, of course, never happened. At least, not until November 2020, when, apparently after receiving literally tens of emails from Pokemon fans, Mr. Spoonman himself decided to give Nintendo his blessing to use the character once again, releasing Kadabra from 20 years of limbo. He apologised for the lengthy kerfuffle and proclaimed that surely Kadabra was one of the rarest Pokemon cards out there, while also being sure to link to his website. People wondered if the whole apology was just yet another publicity stunt for the self-proclaimed psychic to try and keep his name relevant. Still, Kadabra can now be used by Nintendo again, and I'm sure they'll get around to bringing him back into the Pokédex real soon. Sometime in the next 20 years, perhaps. something a little different. How about someone who played a virtual celebrity suing over his likeness, when the game ended up being way more successful and lucrative than anyone really figured it was going to be? That was the case with Daniel Pesina, the original man behind the sunglasses, the first to play the ultimate Hollywood megastar and king of the nut punches himself, Johnny Cage from Mortal Kombat. Pesina played the role of Cage in the first 2 Mortal Kombat games, but after that, well, things turned a little sour. Pesina, along with the other original MK stars, were paid an hourly rate for their work for the first 2 Mortal Kombat titles, and that seemed to be good enough. They thought, or perhaps hoped, that if the series got big, they'd be taken care of. And of course, it got pretty big indeed. Not just in the arcades, but in the home, making ridiculous wads of cash that, well, the actors didn't see much of. Pesina decided to go to court, asking for $10 million and claiming that Midway had no authority to use his likeness in the home versions of the game, and that it had infringed on his right to publicity. The result was naturally predictable. Midway delivered a pretty quick fatality, with the judges saying that Daniel Pesina wasn't a big enough celebrity for his right of publicity to be fringed upon. The crux of which hinged on a survey that Midway conducted where only 6% of 300 or so people were able to recognise Pesina as Johnny Cage. It's possible that Pesina might have been able to make a more compelling argument, but in the end, well, he only had a small team of lawyers, while Midway had a whole platoon of them to call on. In an interview years after the fact, Pesina said he had no hard feelings, although he did believe the absence of Johnny Cage in Mortal Kombat 3 was a tacit admission on Midway's part that he was actually recognisable in the role. A small victory, I suppose, but not a flawless one. By the way, Daniel Pesina wasn't the only Mortal Kombat actor to take Midway to court. The company were also sued by Philip Arn, Elizabeth Malecki and Caitlin Zemir in 1997, who again said they hadn't authorised their likeness to be used in the home versions of the game. Naturally, they all lost the case. None of them could prove that they hadn't been paid appropriately by Midway, which, well, is perhaps a bit of a bugger considering the huge success of this series. But at least Daniel Pesina also had an important role to play in classic fighting games like Bloodstorm and Tattoo Assassins. So that must be a relief. Well, sort of. Actually, it isn't at all, is it? I don't know why I brought that up now. Now you might be wondering if any of these likeness rights lawsuits actually went particularly well for the plaintiffs. I mean, most of the time it tends to make them look bad, or that they're after money. And well, in some cases they probably are. But there are times when the celebrities in question might have a bit more of a case. And one of those times just happens to involve a certain company that everyone utterly hates for good reason. Not to mention a series of games that, by this point, they'd virtually milked to death. By 2009, Activision weren't exactly strangers to controversy surrounding their diminishing Guitar Hero titles. Guitar Hero 5 had allowed players to pick avatars of several famous musicians. However, there was a lot of negative talk about being able to pick the late Nirvana frontman, Kurt Cobain, with folks like Jeff Gertzman questioning his inclusion. When angry folks took to Twitter to have a go at Cobain's widow, Courtney Love, for selling off Kurt's image in a way that he would have likely disapproved of, she responded that she received absolutely nothing whatsoever for his inclusion, and announced her intentions to sue. While other musicians, including Dave Grohl and Chris Novoselic, not to mention John Bon Jovi, also disapproved mightily. Heck, it was hard to find anyone who didn't find the whole feature to be just, well, a little bit weird. The main problem for most people wasn't necessarily Cobain's inclusion in the game, it's that the avatar of Cobain could be used to sing, well, any song in the game, and wasn't limited to songs that he'd written. While no lawsuits were filed over Guitar Hero 5, the next game in the series, Band Hero, saw a band finally have enough of the whole practice. When it became clear that you could do the exact same thing again in this game, the band No Doubt sued Activision, claiming that having Gwen Stefani and the company sing songs that didn't belong to them wasn't part of the deal. Activision, however, well, they naturally claimed otherwise. In particular, the band objected to being seen to perform songs like Honky Tonk Woman by the Rolling Stones, saying that it was an unauthorised performance featuring Gwen Stefani singing in a male voice, Mick Jagger's to be precise, about having sex with prostitutes. Courtney Love also announced plans to join this lawsuit, and of all the likeness fights that seem to happen around this time, this one seemed to have the most chance of becoming a big deal. However, No Doubt and Activision settled out of court in 2012, the day before the hearing was due to commence, probably avoiding a long and messy struggle. No one knows how things were settled, and seeing as the Guitar Hero games had rather faded away by this stage, the problem kinda resolved itself. But let's be honest here, the band might have had a point on this one. If old bands are going to perform virtually as themselves from 30 years ago, then damn it, they should at least be virtually playing their own songs. Hello you, thanks ever so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to be first to see future Fact Hunt episodes. Click on the bell if you already are to make sure you're notified, and be sure to check out my other episodes. And if you want to be super awesome, check out my Patreon. But thanks again for watching, and until next time friends, I'm missing you already.